So, hello my friends, and we again guests of German. And today we have a very special guest, Fred. Fred is a ethno-anthropologist and ethnic music collector. Maybe he one of the very rare persons what I met before, because he was the same as me in a lot of areas in the south of China, in the north of Thailand, north of Laos, also in Burma, or maybe some other countries. And he collecting very interesting records and music, and also some ethnic materials. And we with German together with Fred opening a very special project. But maybe first, Fred, explain a little bit about your story and how did you start at that.
Okay, now I started to study anthropology here in Amsterdam. That's a long time ago. So that was in 1973 I started, and I finished in 1982. And that time already I got the interest in using music as a subject for anthropological research. I started with studying, and then for the master thesis, studying high life in Ghana. That's the mixture of Western and traditional music from there. So I wrote my thesis about that one, and then I finished my studies. And then after that one, I got the interest to get more into the traditional type of music, because in fact that was the thing which most fascinated me when I was in Ghana, you know. And it was still, you could see it on the street, wherever, in all kinds of occasions, was no problem at all. And then I found out also that if you listen in the type of music type of thing, musically, then you would find that you find more interesting subjects in the traditional music as into the modern music. So the guitar bands just played a simplified version of traditional music.
So you find the roots of the ethnical studying.
And the roots contain a much more interesting type of thing. For example, rhythm. If you could listen to it, rhythm was always much more complicated if you listen to traditional music, and not complicated if you listen to more modern music. You know. So okay, then I continue with this type of thing, and I started to become I made a radio broadcast. And in the time, my interest shifted from Africa to first Central Asia. And so I went to Mongolia and I looked there. And then when I was there, I thought, now why not go to China? And so I traveled through the whole of China. I traveled to Beijing, and then from Beijing to Langchang, and then all the way to the south to Xishuangbanna. And it was a kind of strange experience at that time, because there was hardly any tourists there. It was just after Tiananmen Square, so only few Westerns would come.
It was in the beginning of 90s, so it was very long time ago, almost 30 years. So it's what you was maybe one of the first foreigners who come there after these openings of borders and so on in China, maybe, especially in that regions, I think.
Yeah, but there had been foreigners before, you know. Because when I came to Kunming, there was some other foreigners, not many, but there were some other foreigners there also. And when I go to Jinhong, there was also still a hotel, you know, where you could stay, and they were used to having people from outside. It was different if you would come to the smaller towns, because there they had hotels just in the way that Chinese hotels, you know, no doors.
I know. Even me, I was there for first time 20 years later, but still contain a lot of very unique traditional things and some.
Yeah, but at that time, when I was there in Xishuangbanna, or Xishuangbanna, as they call it in Chinese,
Xishuangbanna,
I got the interest in the local type of music, you know. I didn't make many recordings at that time because it was too difficult, and I had no way to communicate with the people at that time.
You traveled by alone, or you?
Yeah, I traveled alone.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it was fully like experience, just without any guides or.
Yeah, but it was. Look, I didn't speak Chinese. I could not read Chinese.
Wow.
So if you wanted to find something, it was impossible because everything was in Chinese type of
How did you take
characters.
food or because also that time I think no one speak English there.
No, hardly anybody.
Yeah.
In the big city maybe some, but not many. So if you want to have food, you had to point to it.
I need this one.
And if you want to find a hotel, you had to copy the characters from some guidebook, and then show around like that.
So you write down the characters by your hand. Wow, that's,
and in a way I managed still to get somewhere, because I partly traveled by train and by bus, there was no problem. But it was quite difficult.
Because there is no Google for that time. There is no translations on internet. Because now it's very simple. You can just find some character and translate it. But that time it was really kind of research.
So after I came back, I decided to go spend some time in Southeast Asia. I started making a video together with other people on the fate of the Karen people, the people who live in between the border of Burma. I'd like to call it Burma, not Myanmar. Because Myanmar is the name that the military government gave to the country.
It's their name, I know.
It's not really. So I still call it Burma, and Thailand they live. And at that time the civil war was quite heavy still in Burma, and so I spoke with some of the refugees, but also I went into the liberated areas in Burma itself.
There is in the north of Burma there is a Vabang. It's a They call themselves a country, but as I know, it's mostly small national minorities and local Chinese people living there. And this area is independent from Burma itself, so it's still under control with help of China, of course, because there's a lot of Chinese. I even find out their local websites, even television, and so on, and it's working. So they a pretty big area on the north of Burma. Did you also was there?
No, not in the War area. I was on the Shonbana side.
The Shonbana side.
Because the Bulang are living on the other side of the border. I have been in Kengtung, that's in Shan State. So and that's it's not exactly the same area, but it's not far
sound,
from it,
I think is the last one. Okay, sorry, get on.
But anyway, so at that time I decided, I'm gonna go spend more time in Southeast Asia, and I'm gonna try to record the traditional music, because I knew at that time there was almost hardly any of traditional music from that area.
So it's just
at all available anywhere.
Nothing. Wow.
There was a few recordings made by missionaries. So the American Protestant missionaries had made some recordings, and there was a German-Swiss researcher who had made also some recordings. And I know that at that time there was also a Swedish guy who was interested in the music of the Kamu. So that's part of the minorities in Laos. And later also one Kamu person who was a refugee, he got refugee status in Sweden. And he has become a researcher about the Kamu tradition and style also, and he has written several books. So I started to make these recordings. I did that all by myself, also financed by myself. I only used it for making radio broadcasts.
And how did you record? Which type of recorder do you have at that time? Is it cassette recorder?
No, I started with in the beginning with the cassette recorder, the Sony professional cassette recorder. Then a DAT recorder. But that was not really such a success, because the DAT recorder is very sensitive to humidity and that type of
often broke.
circumstance. So
but that is quality is very high.
the quality is very good, and also the recordings I made are quite interesting. I find still. The Monk song you heard before was also recorded with the dot recorder. And then later, after that, I had started with the MD. So that's already digital but compressed. And then with the normal digital recorder, that's the last one I used. The importance are the microphones that you have. And although it's maybe strange, but the old type of Sennheiser microphones are often the best to use because they are not too sensitive. You have to be pretty close to the person you record,
to the person who
and but you can take it in your hand, because if you make recordings outside, often you cannot use stands because people are moving anyway. If they're making music or whatever, so they don't sit quietly in one place, but they just move, So you have to follow them with your microphone, and you need a kind of experience in that one because it takes a time before you can use a microphone and still have not too much disturbances. And for example, wind is very difficult, so you need to have wind protection.
Like this one,
and you have to, at the same time you have to be sensitive enough to be able to move the microphone without that you're making a noise, and with some microphones, the more expensive ones and the more sensitive ones, you cannot do that because they give too much.
It's very sensitive, even you just touch. It's
so then. So there's a compromise you have to make,
Yes. It also each time it's research how to do that better.
Each time you have to try to record it, and then if you don't manage to,
And how do local people interact with you? Because as soon as you didn't know the language, but how do you explain? You have some special letter for them to explain?
No, I always work with people with somebody else who translates for me.
Who help you?
So. If it's in the Thai language, my wife is from this area, it's a Thai Yong, so she can speak the Lu language, because it's very related, So she can talk with them, in that way. For the other minorities, you need to have somebody a local guide who can translate. And sometimes it works, sometimes it's a bit hard, because the local translator doesn't know that much English, to be able to translate good. And that makes it difficult to get correct translations. But in itself, in general, it's my experience that people don't mind too much if you make recordings, I always explain, of course, that I'm going to use these recordings for broadcast, and I also pay them for it,
of course.
And I pay them substantially more as they would earn normally for doing the same thing,
So they was lucky about that, of course, because mostly in that area is not so rich people living there.
No, but usually the thing is, what I found out is that often there's nobody who has interest in this type of music. They are happy that somebody comes who is interested in that. And in some ways, in that way, you stimulate also and preserve this type of cultural things, That is something I already found out quite early in my recording career, For example, with the Karen, I recorded a number of people who expressed also that they were quite amazed by that I came to want to listen to them old songs, And
it's really different for them. And I really because I also traveled the same area for a long time, I sometimes met this type of music events. They have local and this how to say local music, but I never never recorded, but for now I just have an idea. But maybe later, if you have time and ability, we can travel together to the same area to record something, because I have a lot of friends there, and especially in Hani, as I told you before, and this is a very interesting way of how to say research there also together with tea, because at the same time as you told, of course you drink tea with them sometimes, and how did you find it for that time?
Now look, if you travel in the mountainous regions, in the whole Southeast Asia, everywhere it's the same story. They have a pot of tea, which you have ready more or less the whole day long, and it's very light. It's very light green tea, and that's what you drink. Sometimes it's mixed with a bit of salt also. I don't know for sure, but it's Chinese green tea, I think.
Just regular. And what was your last? How long did you travel? You said that you before started in the beginning of 90s. Yeah. And you still continued it, or?
No, the last time is a number of years ago, because for circumstances I have not been able to travel anymore for 5 or 6 years,
But still, very long time, like 20 years or something.
The thing is, I had the idea, I want to systematically record all these ethnic groups, because but there's a lot of them.
Yeah, so it's
and so sometimes it's difficult to reach them. Some areas you cannot really go to. For example, Burma is, of course, a few years now that's open.
Yes.
I'd like to go there, that would be very interesting to do. The thing is also the time has changed a bit in that many more people have now all kind of equipment which can be quite disturbing, Motorbikes, for example, they are terrible.
I see. So we must take these musicians, for example, to the forest and record there, or something.
Even there, in the forest. And for example, I recorded also in some Tayar people in outside of the village, and that's already 10 years ago. But you still can hear the car, in the distance.
Yeah, I see.
It's getting really a problem,
But it's also can be reachable, just more difficult. You must to take all of them to a special car, go somewhere outside of village, maybe record there, especially if you mainly focus it on audio side. Of course, you disturb any kind of noise will disturb the records, will spoil it.
Any noise of combustion engines. Anything with car, motorbike, whatever they have, and you have to really take precautions then. It's something which makes the setup a bit unusual, because I prefer to record in the context that the music is also really used, So that you have also, for example, a festival or whatever, because then it's the most real, and you catch also then the emotions which belong to it, which is always in another setting, in a special context, is always a bit different. Of course, after a while, people will get into it, and then they will express themselves as you usually do, But you have to keep that in mind, that sometimes it takes a bit of time before they really are free enough to do that one.
Yeah, it can be like, you find them and you start recording from this. So you first need to communicate with them, spend some time, let them feel relaxed about you and your purposes and so on.
Yeah, that's of course always. You have to spend time,
And how long regularly was your trip when you, for example, when you go to Thailand or Yunnan, or how long does it take?
It depends a bit on the circumstances. It is from 1 month to half a year,
Oh, so the longest period was like also half year there.
Yeah.
Wow, great.
Yeah, because often music is only performed in certain
holidays or something. They need to wait till it.
And then you have to go back and come specially for that one.
Wow! So this date is a special holiday, and you travel specially to this place. Wow.
Because of the dates are not fixed, it can also it's always more or less around that period.
They have some interesting stories about that. When you arrive somewhere and you wait for something, but it doesn't happen or something like that, or.
Look, if you're there, you can more or less guess it, because they have a system in which they calculate the date, That can be if it's a lunar calendar, it has to do with how the moon is behaving, So it must be full moon or it must be half moon or something like that. Also, for example, thinking about Sipsopana, I know that the Genoa people, they have one time a year a 3-day festival. And on this 3-day festival, they're gonna perform a kind of epic story, So then you have, but you need a 3-day recording, so that's not easy, because you need material to do that, and electricity can also be a problem.
So you need more batteries, more equipment to film it, enough mini discs.
Whatever you need to have for electricity. I have been troubled by it several times, that your electricity stock is finished at a certain moment. So you have to recharge it. And before it was lunar recharging, solar recharging was difficult, So you had to get some new batteries from the town, which was hours and hours of journey.
So you'd get back, especially travel for batteries and back.
Or I had somebody who would go to town, buy batteries and come back. That's the way how to do that. And also the tape, the material. It has to be fitted on something. There are many more of this type of problems you can have. Like the volume can be too high suddenly because somebody shot next to the microphone or whatever, that's all things you have to calculate.
And you did you have any maybe conflicts there, or always it was very peaceful with the local people who maybe interacted you not so friendly, or did you have something like that?
No, I had conflicts with officials.
In China, or it was a...
No, not really in China, but you have to be very careful in China.
It's I remember. Especially in U9, there's a lot of posts which check your documents. Till now, it is.
Now, also, what the problem is that in China, people cannot express what they think, For example, if you would talk about Buddhist subjects.
Must be very careful with that.
You know that they will not tell you the truth, because.
But I was very surprised. It's very interesting. I even have a filmed video about that. On Bada Mountain, in the border with Lao, there was a Bulan national minority village, and they have a temple which is it's a Buddhist temple, but there is a type of temples on the south of China is very close to Thailand style, because it's with some paintings on it. It's much more different of Buddhists what we have in the middle China here, or in Tibet. So it's different from Tibet and China at the same time. And there was a lot of paintings which is explaining how the local Bulan minority fight the Chinese soldiers. And it's still it was like 2 years ago. I filmed it 2 years ago, and what was very surprising me, but it was a new, so it's not like old, temple. It was a new temple, and with the paintings, I asked it, especially, it was like 7 years, almost, placed in the center of a village, and where the Chinese soldiers beat it by national minorities. I was very surprised. So because they're a kind of, they're not separatists or something, but they see these stories as a kind of story what happened, and they don't worry about what they do something wrong. We just explaining that story in the story of village. It was story how they react on when Chinese soldiers came there. So I was very surprised about that, because it mostly you can't find something like that in other places. So I was very surprised.
Yeah, and the thing is, it could be referred to the time before the communists came, eh?
Yeah.
Because in Kuomintang time, there was also
militarists, maybe from maybe.
Because there was also in that time there were punishment expeditions by the Chinese army against the Bulang and also against the Jinhua.
It was before the 49. Maybe just I didn't.
So if you. It could be that it happened also afterwards, but then they would tell the story in that way, you know. The way how to. But anyway, I had one time in Laos, for example, that I was recording, and during the recording, suddenly a person who said that he was an official came to say that I could not do it and they should stop and whatever, you know.
And they even didn't realize what are you doing and what is your purpose. They just...
they thought I was a journalist or something like that, you know. So they thought immediately, there's a problem and this is not allowed in over here, you know. Now that was in an area, a Bokeo area, which was quite remote, you know. So I don't know what the background was of that one. But it's one of the areas where a lot of the trafficking find place, you know. So there could be that there's some connection with that one.
Yeah, because we're just afraid you can know some information, but we don't want to share it. Yeah. And you just told about the story in Laos, we're just switching the batteries and the cameras, and Fred just told about why did you don't use digital recordings, because it's.
Now, I told you a story of the experience with digital recording, and that's quite important. You have to realize that in Southeast Asia, songs will last a long time. So to have a song which lasts an hour it's okay. As usual, you know. It's not something strange. But the problem is with many digital recorders, they have a limit on the time you can record a file in one time. So they have a limit of 1 hour. And you have to set your recording on a higher limit if possible, because otherwise you cannot record really part of the what the tradition is, you know. For example, if you know the Tailu songs, which they play the flute, you know, the free reed flute, and have a song with it, man and girl often. And they can last,
half of a day.
Whatever, you know, you just continue. And you have to try to record it totally, you know, and not have it cut halfway because your recorder stops.
Yeah, and you told about your radio broadcast. Can you a little bit explain the story about radio and how did you organize?
Now, the radio broadcast, that's some is a special story, you know. I was at that time living in a squat here in Amsterdam in the harbor, and we just started with sound reporters. It was me and a Italian friend of mine, Walter Mioli, and we approached the radio, the Dutch national radio, with our ideas, you know. And so we were invited for a radio broadcast, and then invited again for a radio broadcast. And later I was asked to, invited more or less regular by them. So I made a number of radio broadcasts of what's called the Wandelende Tak. So that's for the VPRO. And there I started to make broadcasts with ethnic recordings, you know. That's how it all started.
You also explained stories and what is this meaning of the songs, and so you have whole information. And also you said that you made a lot of photos with the area, but you not filmed the videos for that time.
No, I didn't use video because at that time it was
very difficult.
It was expensive to do. And secondly, you cannot do two things at the same time.
Yeah, if you're only one person, so it's
because you have to pay attention to record audio, you know. And if your attention is go to the video, then it's different. Also, one of the things with video at that time, but it's probably nowadays less, is that the sound quality was not so good, in fact. And often the sound record it was go with if you use the focus or not. You know, if you would focus, then the sound would be getting
concentrated.
Maybe later, if we do travel together, we can combine. You can focus on the audio side. We can make a video.
Yeah, what you have to do is that you have to record it separately. You know.
Yeah. That's a good idea.
And of course, you can always later edit it and fit it together. You know. Although you have to watch out that you.
We'll film it together. Just make it professional set up. And film, one guy control audio, second cameraman control cameras, and it will be like professional side.
Yeah, and also the people who do the interview are very important. The fact if you talk with the people, you have to ask them questions, you know, and the type of questions and how you ask this is important, you know, even if you do it through the translator. And that also decides the quality of what you get, you know.
Yes.
So you cannot really think about other things, you know, at the same time.
Yeah. So you know, as more as you travel, as more you understand their mentality, of course. Yeah. So you discover more and more how to. Is better to act with them, yes, or how to.
For example, you know, if you are a vegetarian and if you don't drink alcohol, you have a problem, you know. I can tell you.
For me, it's the same. So for me, it's always when I tell that I'm vegetarian and not drink alcohol, it often a little bit not frustrating, but they looks at you a little bit strange, and you must explain that, and they say, why are you Muslim, or you have some mental problems, or you have some, or are you okay?
Look, I learned that quite early already. If you would be with Mongol people, you know, you would refuse them drink, you know, them strong drink, they would not talk to you anymore, you know.
Wow, so it's a kind of respect tradition.
Yeah, but if the refusing of things is kind of an insult, you know. So, you have to get used to it, then you have no other choice.
So let me talk a little bit about our further project with German and Fred, because I just maybe you already heard a story about German. I told it before in some videos, and German is living here in Amsterdam for a very long time, and he have a lot of friends and relations, the same as Fred, for example. And they have an idea about the project, and maybe German tell a little bit about that.
Okay.
The story.
So yes, that's project that brews for a long time in my brain, but with Fred we already tried to realize one project with the vinyl publishing, and it was several years ago, and we came up with certain ideas. We exchanged some interesting files, information, and both were very enthusiastic. Unfortunately, it didn't happen then, but the energy never disappears, you know. So the
energy you put in some project still exists.
Yes, and as you know, like again, I'm very much interested in general in ethnomusicology. I had my own research, but my area of research was mainly Central Asia. Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and then also Japan and southern Japan, like islands. And so area that Fred's research covers is very exciting, the Southeast Asia. So, and also, I mean, I'm following the latest ethnographic trends in recent releases of the records, and I think the interest is growing, and the audience that is interested in these authentic recordings is also growing. Perhaps, like I started to listen to this music when I was very young, like I was 24, 25, now I'm 54 almost. So I think that's a good positive development. And so, due to your sudden appearance here in Amsterdam, which is, and your activity with the tea, which is not just a business, it's a very
cultural thing.
yeah, it's the elegant multisensorial form of very high quality sort of activity for intellectuals, I would say. Not only intellectuals in terms of knowledge, but also spontaneous people who look for something more authentic than that mainstream social life offers you. And tea is very specific, the tea culture. So
the communication framework, as we talked. So for people who really want to find out something new,
yeah. So you know how we met suddenly, bumped into each other
on the street,
on the corner of Prinsengracht and Brouwersgracht. I can even and then immediately we exchanged and thought and understood that there are lots of possibilities. And then I called you because I was planning and still planning my own release. I got some little grant. This idea came up, why wouldn't we collaborate? Because your activity could support this form of publication. It's the vinyl. It's the unique analog format, which is part of this collectible, people collect vinyls. Vinyl is valuable
it
commodity.
Grows now,
Grows. The culture of listening to vinyl is the alternative to this compressed MP3 digital things. It's much warmer, even though some material are more difficult to put on vinyl with master. But anyway, so here we are. I admire Fred's work for a long time already. I think I met Fred, I was also I did a few programs for Wandel in the Tag, for Walter Schlosse on VPRO radio. And I did the program on Kalmykia, on Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. And
with your researchers.
I did also my own programs, and even, it was a unique platform. Once a week on national radio there was a program dedicated to ethnic sort of folklore, traditional music, and it covered all the regions of the earth, including Europe. And Walter Schlosse died quite recently, several years ago. And his program
was financial.
His program, like everything in Europe and in the world, is becoming, diminished. The cultural platforms are cut, and Holland, in principle, the Netherlands, this country was at the center of ethnographic research, I think, in the past. In fact, ethnomusicology is invention of the Dutchman, Jaap Kunst. He's in. And I'm a big admirer of Jaap Kunst, Robert van Gulik, there are some names. And Fred Galles is one of those names that I think should be included in this pleiad of researchers, enthusiasts, people who don't care much about material wealth, that love to research traditional cultures, record unique disappearing traditions, because they disappear.
Because I think some of your records are really you can't even find these tribes or these traditions, because it's like recorded 30 years ago, and maybe if for example these people isn't alive for now already, and they maybe we can't even find the same.
That could be true. I'm not that positive about the protection of the traditional cultures, and that's also why I think that recordings and also radio broadcasts are important, because they present at least, and even if it's the memory, you still can hear it, and otherwise it will be totally disappear. And I've done a research just was some time ago about what I call the disappearing voices. That's about how much we can prove how many cultures have disappeared already.
Wow.
And you get a shock, There are things which are still recordings only available on wax cylinders.
Wow.
That's the worst quality of sound recording you can imagine, you know.
But that's the earliest also.
Yeah. For example, this is the Tierra del Fuego, the Vuureilanden, so the south of Argentina and Chile, you know. So next to the Antarctic region, the Indians which were living there, they have been killed, basically.
But still there are some very old records.
There's a little bit, you know, we know a little bit about the language, there's a little bit about recordings, but it's a really big pity that, you know,
you can't even listen to that.
But you cannot meet these people anymore, you cannot see how it looks like, you know, you cannot hear anything. So I do think it's quite important to make recordings. And I also do think that you need to have an outlet for it. And that's to come back on the Wandelende Tak, this radio broadcast, the radio program. And before, the national radio and television is subsidized by the government. But the government has consequently cut the budget of them. And they started to talk about, it should be more popular, it should have more listeners and whatever, you know. They never realized that if you made a broadcast like that, you know, you have already a small town listening to it, you know. So 50 to 100,000 people. I don't know why they not accept that as being successful, you know.
Because of this culture of the number of, you know, like the amount of people, you know, it's not about the quality, it's about the quantity, you know. And that's. But I want to add to what you said just now, that Holland, Amsterdam, for instance, was the center of traditional music scene in terms of the venues, like Souterrain and Troponis, like every day practically, or every week, you say the biggest masters from all over the world, from indigenous groups, from classic traditions like India,
here,
China, would arrive here and give concerts. And they would be accompanied by some people who would research them, bring them here, arrange there. I brought here with Maxim Shaposhnikov, you know him, people from Pamir, you know, like people from Badakhshan, and you know, there are lots of musicians from Siberia that came here, you know, like from Kazakhstan and from Central Asia. But now there is virtually nothing of that sort, like absolutely zero activity. So I think this platform...
It's not because of Corona, it's just it starts before.
Because like the Souterrain, that's from the Tropical Museum, it has been closed down, you know, the theater.
Yes.
And that's the same problem with a lot of other theaters, you know, because they have to have a turnover which is quite high, and you cannot do that anymore with programming things which might be a success or not, you know. So people cannot take any risk anymore.
Yeah, but has to do with it is called in Russian хозрасчет. So every venue, before it was sort of subsidized by the government, and it was a large amount of, I mean, it's not a cheap activity, you know, to support such a thing, but it was I think the most attractive part of the Dutch, let's say, social, cultural life, you know, and suddenly it slowly disappeared, and this gentleman, Walter Schlosser, who ran this program, by the way, Wandelende Tak in Russian means Bogomol. You know this animal. He had the funds, he supported people like Fred, and like I would get a good financial reward for every program, you know, and if I would record outside, you know, he could also, VPRO could support, to give you money to cover your costs, because, or even you could ask them to cover all your travel, but you know, it was a long time ago, and slowly it all diminished, and then this...
But we find out, sorry for interrupting, we found out the way how we can rebuild this tradition, and which is already German started to talking about, what we decided together to start the record label on vinyl mostly. Maybe also it will be later accessible on digital, but we will focus it on vinyl and publish old archives of Fred, which is really incredible. We just listened to some selective records, but Fred have incredible amount of very rare records, which is absolutely inaccessible now, and we will start a label and focus on these records. At the same time, also with German, we'll work with some other maybe electronic music, because German is a very famous musician, as you know, maybe all for music. If German didn't think that he is a very famous, but I think that participating in Board, for example, there is your track on the first movie.
Two tracks.
Two tracks, yeah, and also all for music of German. I will post the link in the comments, and maybe we will publish also some electronic and remixes for ethnic music and some experimental things.
Yes, but it's incredibly nice and big, let's say. I think to start such a release with an archive of Fred. His selection of things from Southeast Asia, which relate to your
which is very culture, because there is the records originally from Yunnan, from the same people which supplying tea for us, and even from the north of Thailand also, which is very also interesting for us, because I just started collaborate with Thailand tea manufacturers, and also from the same regions we have some very rare records. So it's also, for me, it's also a way for how to say, express our own culture side. So because I never make some, how to say, stupid marketing, because we're doing business, of course, but for me it's a very good way to promote in the right way, to do something really useful, not only for our business but also so for the culture and for the people, to support, to rebuild this old materials, to make it more popular, to attract attention to this theme, because no one knows so much about ethnic musicology, for example.
Now, may I remark then that I still make a radio broadcast. It's one time a month on Friday evening, you know.
I will post a link here.
And the next one, so the broadcast of tomorrow, will be about Sipsong Panaya. And then after it has been broadcasted, that everybody can listen to it on the internet if they want to. So that's interesting in some ways. Now about the idea that maybe you can bring back also performances. That's maybe possible. I'm not quite sure, you know, what the possibilities are. I have a lot of people I know, because I'm also
in contact
part of the board of the Society for Ethnomusicologists, the Dutch one. So I have contacts which can organize people who come from India, you know, to make a performance or whatever, you know. So okay.
I think it's useful. We can make it not like each day as it was in the museum, but sometime, because we will have a place in the club for special performances. I think it will be a good option.
No, but I want to add that in relation to your form of activity, like if tea, you know, like now we are expanding, you are expanding in the first place. Like tea is basically the sense of taste, you know, the sense of, and here we go into the sense of sound also, so it becomes multisensorial. And we are waiting for your club to be open in Amsterdam, because with such a big reputation as Amsterdam, and this amount of psychedelic possibilities here, as you know, like free, accessible marijuana, which in good ways expand your, you know, like transrational form of, of perception of the world, you know. And yet there is not such a lot of places like that, I tell you. There are a couple, so we are waiting for it. And I want to also say that our activity was also, like, I am trying also to spread this knowledge on music. I have also a podcast which is called Prosodia, and it's about philosophy of music. So there is a Telegram channel. Of course, it's a very limited amount of listeners, because material that I present is very specific. Like the latest was on Robert van Gulik, on Dutch, unique researcher on Chinese lute. Chinese actually zither, but he calls it lute. But anyway, due to your support and just because we met, hopefully this project will realize and give its fruits, you know.
Step by step as we talk. There is a very funny, but not funny, Chinese, Chen Yu. It's not originally Chinese because it changed it to Russian. It's called Ibu Ibudi Huidao Mudi. It's called step by step you will reach the goal. But in Russian it sounds a little bit not so good.
It sounds funny.
Huidao Mudi. It's Chinese. I like the language, and because it's also very melodic. At the same time, this is why we are singing a lot, because it's the tones. It's very vibing, as Dima says.
There's two other remarks I want to make. Is that first of all, you always, wherever you go to make recordings, you find local people who are interested in it. So that's very important that you try to find these people and talk with them, because they have most of the knowledge. And then the second thing is the archive. Because in archives you find still a lot of information and a lot of sound examples. The only problem is that most archives are very difficult to come into to get any idea about what they have and that you can listen to it,
So you need to research your archive first. You have to find out.
You have to get permission to get into it, and it's everywhere the same, and it's always a problematic thing. But especially for peoples whose culture has been endangered. For example, the Siberian minorities. If you want to listen to what their music should be, the only thing you can use is archives, because.
But now I just found, maybe German will share you with some links, because we already talked to some people from Altai and from Buryatia. There's a lot of throat singing and some national instruments. There is a YouTube channel called in Russian, called Vek, like century, and there's a guy, I didn't know him, but he just filming a lot of videos and with very quality sound, with small national minorities and Russian ethnic music and Siberian, Altai ethnic music. It's very interesting. Maybe to also we already talked to them, maybe collaborate or bring them here, or even and also make records for them. And so it's also a good option because we have a lot of relations there, and it becomes more and more popular in Russia. Also, I think that this is roots music, ethnic music will grow, because a lot of people now want, escape from the city, from all these digital things, be closer to nature, and I think this is a part of this vibe also. When you just stay in the wind and forest on behind the sea, you just feel something that you can't even explain. You just feel, I'm back home, and then you was in jungles for a long time, and you know this feeling. You understand what I'm talking about, and when you stare near these people, you feel something completely different, and it's really will be extremely great if we can just catch small part of this feeling and explain it to the people, show them how it is, so it's something incredible.
It actually has also the sound of the environment. So what kind of things you hear, that also influence, of course, the type of sound you make. So if you live in the city, with all the engines, they come back in your music also. And the same is also if you live in a forest or if you live near the sea. So there is this relationship, and it's not always directly to prove, but you can find it back, in the type of sound. Now that's one thing. The second is that instruments, the sound of instruments is also determined by the environment. So if you play, for example, wood, you have these people from the not from Amur region, but from the
Sakhalin.
Sakhalin, They play the
wooden xylophone? Or?
Yeah, no, it's a bit like it, but
percussion.
it's
so
more
like
big pieces of wood, you know.
Uh-huh.
I know that from the term xalapasta, which is used by the Basque people in North Spain and French, you know. And because this wooden type of bulk pieces of wood, you know, has a sound also, a kind of
pitch.
note.
It has a pitch, yeah.
And so you can.
You remember this track that I showed you when we were when I visited you, and you said, "Oh, I like this one." I used the sample of these instruments there. You could hear
it. Realize it's very
like
different.
So it's like different pitched wood blocks. But the wood blocks are sometimes.
I have a stone xylophone from Guizhou province, and I was there. I traveled and I'm collecting little bit of these ethnical instruments. I'm not playing, but I just like it. And I found out that one guy just cut the stones. It's all very common in Asia. We cut the stones or fit size and fit to some notes.
Yeah, it's called sonorous stones.
So it's just stone xylophone. It's incredible sound.
Even in Mongolia they have this. It's.
The thing is, this stone xylophone. The stone xylophone. It's prehistoric. It has been found in Vietnam, and already in the 50s, something like that. There's also a bit of recording by the French made in that time. I think this Longar record is from the same session, you know. And it is always said that this is the beginning of the gamelan type of music. There's more or less the same type of tuning, you know.
Interesting.
So there's some reality also. And I remember also being in Sichuan-Bana. That it was in Yunnan, you know. They have the thing which is called the stone forest.
Stone forest, near Kunming.
Okay, and in this stone forest,
they can play that.
They play a number of these stones, you know.
I never seen it, but when I was there, some local guy just explained to me that sometime they have a show there, like daily or one time a week, when they play it on these stones, and it sounds very incredible. It's very beautiful, like this stone forest, like stones like that, like really looks like forest, and it's very strange structures and forms. And it's a very big attraction, tourist attraction near Kunming.
In Japan, usually in Buddhist temples, like particularly on Shikoku, there is a place where a big sonorous stone is placed. So where you can come and just hit it in a different part of the stone, and it will give a different pitch. Interesting. I have some recordings of sonorous stones from Japan, even video recordings.
Okay.
It's probably almost time. I feel.
Okay. So, my friends, thank you a lot for watching, and I hope we will meet again with Fred and with German later, as soon as we publish our first record. And I hope this project will also increase maybe later to some travels. I hope maybe as soon as borders open. So thank you, Fred. Thank you for interview. I think it will be very interesting. Also, I leave all the links below, the Fred page, the German page. So keep in touch, drink nice tea and listen to good music. Bye bye.